Hey guys, good morning. Welcome to week 6, section 11. I'll be dealing with privilege escalations. We'll be dealing with privilege escalation basics. We'll be dealing with understanding privilege escalation techniques in Linux system. We'll be dealing with tools like LinPs, GTFO beans, and we'll have assignments, which is to perform a privilege escalation on a controlled environment. What is privilege escalation? Privilege escalation is a security exploit where an attacker gains unauthorized access to a higher level of permission within a system, application, or probably a network. It typically falls into two main categories. Firstly, we have the vertical privilege escalation, which is oftentimes called the privilege elevation, which means the attacker moves from a lower privilege level, e.g., the standard user, to a more higher one, which is either the administrator or root level. An example of that is exploiting vulnerabilities operating system processes to gain administrative control. Number two, we have horizontal privilege escalation, which is where the attacker gains access to another user's account with the same privilege level. Example is using session hijacking or credential theft to access another user's private data. We have common privilege escalation techniques, which is exploiting software vulnerabilities, misconfigured files and system permission, kernel exploits, credential stuffing and brute force attack, DLL hijacking, and token manipulation. Privilege and prevention and mitigation. How do we prevent and how do we mitigate? Firstly, by keeping systems and software updated with the latest patch, application of least privilege for users' account, enabling multi-factors authentication, then again monitor logs for unusual activity, then again use security tools like the IDS and endpoint protection. We have understanding privilege escalation techniques on Linux system. Privilege escalation on Linux system typically involves exploiting misconfigurations, weaknesses, or vulnerabilities to gain higher privileges, e.g., the administrator or the root access. It can be classified into kernel exploits, misconfiguration, and user space exploit. Now, explaining what kernel exploits means is exploiting system vulnerabilities. How is it described? Attackers exploit vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel to gain root access, typically requiring a known exploit against an unpatched kernel version. Example of that is the tactical CVE. What is CVE for future references? That is the common vulnerability exposure. So that is CAL, which is the CVE hyphen 2016 hyphen 5195, which is a race condition, the copy on write. And copy on write is is the full meaning of CAL, which allows writing to read only memory. Again, we have the overlay effects, which is the CVE 2021 3493, which allows privilege escalation by modifying files attributes. Detection and prevention. Keep the kernel updated, use security mode tools like AppArmor or Cell Linux. Then monitor log. We have tools for monitoring log. We have the DMESG/VAR/log/system log for suspicious activity. Then exploiting the SOID binaries. What's SOID? Sets user identification. As it described, SOID binary executes with the owner's privilege, usually root, making them a common target. Attackers exploit misconfigured SOID binaries to escalate privileges. How do we find the SOID binaries? You can see the lines of code below. Exploitation example. If /bin/bash has the SOID bit set, an attacker can get a root shell. That is the line of command. If an SOID binary allows executing command, an attacker can spawn a shell, which is the line of command below. Then how do we detect and then again prevent this? By auditing and removal of unnecessary SOID binaries, by using CSMOD_S to remove SOID from risky binaries, use no SOID mount option on user writable directories. Number three, exploiting misconfigured file permission. How do we describe this? If sensitive file, e.g., etc. shadow batch RC or cron jobs are writable by non-root user, An attacker can modify them to gain higher privileges. How do we find writable files? By running this command below. Then exploiting example, if slash etc slash password is writable, an attacker can add a new root access. Example is this line of code below. If root cron jobs are writable, an attacker can eject a reverse shell. How do we detect this? By restricting file permission. By use ls-la to check sensitive file ownership and permission. Then by monitoring for what unauthorized changes. Number 4, we have the exploiting weak environment variable. Description: if an SOID binary uses system commands without specifying absolute path, an attacker can hijack it. Exploitation example: check if an SOID binary was a system command like ls without specifying /b/ls. If the path variable is writable, replace ls with a malicious script. And that is what we have in the line of code below. How do we prevent and detect this? Always use absolute path in script, like the slash user slash bin slash ls. Then restrict write access to environment variables, that's the chmod 755 slash etc slash profile, and disable dangerous variables like the LD preloads for SUID binaries. Number 5, exploiting SSH keys and weak password. How do you describe this? If an attacker gains access to a low privilege user and SSH keys are misconfigured, they can escalate privileges. Weak or reused password can be brute forced. How do you find weak SSH configuration? Is by running this line of code. Exploitation example: if root SSH private key is accessible, an attacker can ready to log in as root, which is the ssh-i/root dot ssh/id underscore rsa space root at localhost. How do we detect and prevent this? By using strong passwords and key-based authentication, by restricting SSH access, which is permit root login, no in /etc/ssh/sshd underscore config. Then again, you monitor authentication logs by doing what /var/log/auth.log. Number 6, exploiting Docker privileges, which is also escaping containers. Description: if an attacker has access to a misconfigured Docker container, they may escape to the host system. How do we find Docker privileges? By running docker ps-a. Exploitation example: if the container is running as underscore underscore privileged, an attacker can mount the host file system. How do we do that? Docker run -v /colon /mnt -rm -it ubuntu chroot /mnt/bin/bash. How can we detect and prevent this? By avoiding running containers as on privileged, by using user namespace and secoms profiles, then by restricting access to the Docker socket, which is /var/run/docker.sock. 7, exploiting kernel capabilities. That's the caps underscore sys underscore admin or comma cap underscore set uid. Set uid is still the same thing as SUID, which is set user identification. How is this described? If a binary has excessive Linux capability, it can be abused for privilege escalation. Now, how do we find capabilities? By writing get cap -r/2 greater than /dev/null. Expectation example: if cap underscore set UID plus EP set, an attacker can escalate privilege by running /binary underscore wait underscore capabilities. How do we detect and prevent this? By removing unnecessary capabilities, which is the set cap -r vulnerable underscore binary. Then again, audit binaries with get cap regularly. Then again, use app armor /sel linux to restrict capabilities .id plus ep is set, an attacker can escalate privilege. Now, in summary of common privilege escalation method, we'll be discussing by their techniques, attack example, and how we prevent them. So for the kernel exploit techniques, attack for the technique kernel exploit, for the attack example, dirty cow, what is cow? Copy on write, and again overlay effects. How do you prevent it? By updating kernel and enabling SC Linux. For another technique, XUID binaries. Attack example: exploiting configuring SOID binaries, removal of unnecessary SOID bits. Under the weak file permissions technique, attack type is writable slash etc slash past passwords, cron jobs. How do you prevent this? By restricting permissions. Under the techniques of environment variable, attack example is path hijacking, LD underscore reload misuse. How do you prevent it? By using absolute path in script. Under the SSH and weak passwords techniques, attack example is the stolen SSH keys, brute force attack, and what are the prevention? Use key-based authentication. Under the Docker privilege escalation technique, attack example is the running container as hyphen privilege. How do you prevent this? By restricting Docker socket access. Then we have the Linux capabilities abuse. This is misconfigured cap underscore sys underscore admin cap underscore set ID. How do you prevent this? By removal of unnecessary capabilities. Real world privilege escalation attack. Here are some real world examples where attackers use privilege escalation to gain unauthorized access. We have the Dirty Cow, which is CV 2016-5195, which is Linux kernel exploit, where Dirty Cow was bugged in the Linux kernel that let attacker modify files they shouldn't have permissions to. Hackers use this to gain root access to vulnerable Linux system. What is the example attack? A hacker runs a script that tricks the system into letting them edit important system file like etc slash password. They create a new root user and log in with full control. Prevention: always update the Linux kernel, that is running apt update and an apt upgrade. They use security modules like the SE Linux or App Armor to restrict file modification. Number two, Windows token manipulation. That's the Stuxnet in 2010. What actually happened? Stuxnet was a highly sophisticated cyber weapon that targeted Iran's network and nuclear programs. It spread via USB drives and used Windows privilege escalation techniques to install itself without detection. Once inside, it used stolen admin credentials to control industrial machines and destroy uranium centrifuges. Example attack: an employee unknowingly plugs in an infected USB. The malware runs as a normal user but then steals an admin token and executes itself with full system privilege. Prevention: disable auto run for USB devices. Use this privilege access, which is don't let every employee have admin right. Then monitor Windows event log for suspicious activity. Now we have the sudo exploit CV 2019 -14287 Linux misconfiguration. What actually happened? 2019, a flaw in sudo, which is a command that lets users run admin tasks, allowed attackers to run command as root even if they weren't supposed to do. Example attack: a hacker will low privilege on with low privilege pledges on a Linux server runs sudo -u -1 bash. Use bypass restrictions and give them full root access. How do you prevent this? Always update sudo, which is apt update and an apt upgrade. This check sudo -l to ensure only necessary commands can be run as root. What is Limpis? Limpis doesn't require installation. It's a standalone script that you can simply use to download and run. Here's how to get it working on Kali. First, you download Limpis on Kali, open terminal and run this line of command. This downloads the latest version of Limpis. Then it gives execution permission. After downloading, make Limpis executable. They run limpis on Kali Linux to execute Linux. To execute limpis, you run this line of command. Step 4. Transfer limpis to a target machine if needed. If you want to run limpis on a different machine, transfer it using number 1 option, using Python HTTP server on Kali Linux. Then step 5, analyze the output. Limpis analyze security risks. If it shows red, that means it has high risk vulnerability, probably SOID binaries or weak pseudo rules. If it is yellow, medium risk issue, probably writable files and weak permissions. Then if it's showing green, system information, then you can check the results with cat limpis underscore output.txt tab less. What is GTFO beans? GTFO beans is not a tool you install. It is a website and a set of commands used to exploit misconfigured binaries on privilege escalation.
Then this is the GTFO beans website. However, you can install a GTFO bin command line to make searching for exploits easier. All of this is what you're supposed to do. Step one, you clone the GTFO build repository. Then you create a simple search script. Then you search for exploits. Option two, use GTFO beans with GTFO Python tool. Alternatively, you can install a Python-based GTFO beans search tool. Step one, install the tool. Step two, search for exploits. Then, for example, search for VIM, GTFO VIM. It will show you how to exploit VIM for privilege escalation. In summary, GTFO is a website, not a tool that helps find privilege escalation method. You can clone the GTFO bin repository for offline use. You can install a Python to GTFO for quick searches. Then use GTFO bin exploit to escalate privilege using SOID, sudo, or file misconfiguration. Thank you very much.